I've spent the last few days painting and finishing this guitar to get this rustic reclaimed look that I've got going on here, and I'm going to run you through the process. Now first of all, I want to mention this is an open grain wood. I'm working with ash here, and this is going to work best with similarly open grain woods, anything with big pores like this. And I accidentally came across this. I was in the middle of working this body. I was sanding it down. I was spraying filler to get it nice and smooth for its original planned smooth gloss finish. And I got to this point where I'd sprayed filler, I sanded it back. It wasn't smooth yet, but it had this half painted, half wood texture to it. And at that point I decided to run with it. So first big step, get your surface ready but not grain filled. Spray a primer paint, or really probably any good heavy paint onto it, and then sand back until you've exposed some of but not all of the wood. Now after I'd had that painting done, I sanded everything up to a 400 grit sandpaper to get everything nice and smooth and even on the finish. And don't worry about removing more of the paint. You're not going to remove a whole ton more after that. What will happen is you might burn through the paint on the edges faster than you do on the faces. And so now you'll be faced with a little bit of a decision to make. Do you leave those edges worn, or do you do something like a burst finish like I went with here? Now in this case, I threw that decision out to the internet because I just couldn't make up my mind. Funny thing happened. All of the comments on Instagram said that I should keep it as is and I shouldn't put a burst on it. All of my comments on Threads said to burst it. Ultimately, I made the decision that if I did the burst and I didn't like it, I could just sand it back off anyway. So now that I'm at 400 grit sanding, I took just a eggshell black spray paint and I carefully sprayed all of the edges of this guitar, and I sprayed a bit of a burst around the edges of the front and the back faces. I liked how it came out, so then I got to the finishing portion of it. For this guitar, I'm using Varathane water-based polyurethane, and it's not because it's a particularly cheap paint, but because I already had it on hand from refinishing some floors in my house. And the greenest and cheapest material option will always be the thing that you already have on hand. So I went with this. It is meant to be a brush-on poly, but I wanted to make it a wipe-on poly, so I made the decision to thin it down a little bit. It doesn't take a lot of thinning with a water-based polyurethane, but luckily you can do that thinning with just plain water. I pulled some out of the large gallon container, I put it in a jar, I thinned it with just a bit of water till I got to the consistency that I wanted, and I started brushing it on with just these shop towels.
Now you don't want to thin it too much. A little dab will do ya. I probably put a few tablespoons of water into this jar, maybe 1 ounce of water to 12-ish ounces of finish, if that, probably more like a ½ ounce. It's not like I measured it, but let me tell you a couple of things while I put on this third coat. First thing is, as mentioned, this is a brush-on poly, and we're going to thin it just a little bit so that we can use it as a wipe-on polyester. And this is going to give us a lot of benefits, and it's also going to help us be able to judge if we're putting on the correct amount. See, when you're applying this as a wipe-on, as you can see, this is pretty white stuff until it cures clear. And that's going to be our signifier for if we've put on too much. We want the application to look wet, but not white. If you see white streaks, just go back with your rag and wipe it back down and spread that out a little bit. Makes for a really easy indicator to see if we've put the correct amount of finish on or not. Now, because I'm thinning it, I am extending dry times a little bit. I'm mostly going according to recommended dry times according to the manufacturer, but they say to wait 3 hours between coats. I'm waiting about 4 since we've thinned it a little bit, and that's been working out just fine for me. If I get to a point where I'm getting like gumminess or uncured finish between coats, I'll extend the dry time. This finish also says you should do at least a minimum of 3 coats, and that if you wait more than 24 hours between coats, that you should sand between coats. So I'm going to try to get these 3 coats in today. I might do a bit of sanding tomorrow and then do another 3 coats. Since we're thinning it, that same 3 coats that they recommend won't quite do it. But that being said, this is the same finish I used for my floors when I redid them, and it's holding up just fine without a reapplication a couple years later, and they get pretty heavy traffic, so I can't complain about the durability of this. So I actually managed to get coat 4 on the books last night, relatively late, and so now I'm coming in mid-afternoon for coat 5 the next day, which means that I won't have to do any sanding or anything between these coats, or at least I shouldn't.
So it's starting to get to be a more consistent sheen. See, the semi-gloss paint that I used for the burst, it was just a different level of sheen than the wood and primer that I had used for the rest of it. So now I know that I'm getting close to done here, because as each coat dries, it's giving me a more consistent level of gloss across the whole body. Hey, it looks like most of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed yet. So if you like what you're seeing, especially if this is the second or third time that you've found yourself watching a junk music video, why not drop me a like, a subscribe, and in exchange for that, maybe I'll get enough dopamine to keep myself motivated and keep making these oddball instruments and videos about them to show to you. If you're trying to find new ways to build or modify your guitars, your basses, your dulcimers, your amps, your whatever, hit that notification bell, and thanks for stopping by.
All right, so I'm about to put on coat 7 of this polyurethane onto this guitar body, and I think that's going to be the last one. Now, generally, when I'm trying to figure out if I'm done with a finish or not, I'm taking a look, like in this case, after 6 coats, it looks like it's done. It looks like it's got a nice complete finish on it. I'm going to give one more coat after completion just to add resilience. Now, after I get this 7th coat of poly on, which only took me 2 days as opposed to most of my hand-rubbed finishes taking a week or two, with dead batteries.
I wound up doing 7 coats of this polyurethane finish with no sanding in between, as according to the directions, you don't need to sand between coats unless you have let it cure for more than 24 hours between coats, which I never allowed it to do. I got anywhere from 4 to 9 hours between coats so that they would be able to meld together over time. Overall, I really like the finish that I got here, and I think I'll be utilizing this on a few other instruments. I don't know that I'll paint any more guitars in this, but I definitely have the dulcimers and the other smaller folky instruments that I like to build that will look really good in this sort of reclaimed rustic finish that I've got going on here. Here's the end result of this finish. It's nice and smooth, it's nice and glossy, without being too over the top or too much of like a mirror finish. I really like the sheen that I've gotten out of it here. Now, I let this final coat cure for a full 24 hours before I touched anything, but now I've begun reassembly of this guitar with this Amazon neck that I put on it that I kind of brought up to a new level of polish and improved in the last video that I will link over here for you to check out. The next steps to this instrument include making sure that I've got the bridge placement correct, doing that installation, and then moving on to making the pick guard, and I will have a video out on all of that when I do get my first iteration of the pick guard cut and I go to replicate a second one, and hopefully I'll be seeing you then.